Good morning and welcome to the Riley County Historical Museum located at 2309 Claflin Road here in Manhattan, Kansas. My name is Alana Parker and I'm grateful to serve as Curator of Design here at the museum and for the opportunity to share a little bit of the history of the women's suffrage movement in Riley County with you today. This last Wednesday, August 26, 2020, marked the 100th anniversary of the certification of the 19th Amendment, granting women full voting rights in the United States. Here at the Riley County Historical Museum, we have been grateful and fortunate to take a closer look at the events and the people around the women's suffrage movement right here in our county. Even though the constitutional amendment was ratified on August 18th, it was not official until it was certified by U.S. Secretary of State Bainbridge Colby. On August 26, 1920, Colby signed the proclamation in his home in Washington, D.C., ending a struggle for the vote that started a century earlier. But before we delve into the events and individuals that led the women's suffrage movement here in Riley County, it is important to discuss the term suffrage itself and the name given to those who were proponents to the cause. A differentiation is made between a suffragist and a suffragette, as emphasized in local newspapers. The term suffragette was initially used as a more derogatory term and first used by a British reporter to mock those fighting for women's rights. The "et" in suffragette insinuated diminutive, small, or insignificant in nature. Some ladies found the term insulting, while others embraced the word as their own. In the Manhattan newspapers, the earliest use of the word suffragist was in the late 1870s, while the word suffragette was not found in local newspapers until early 1908. This directly coincides with the suffrage activities occurring in Britain at the time, as more militant tactics were sometimes used by some suffragist leaders abroad. And you can see in the Manhattan Republic paper here from 1910, are you, inquires the Marquette Tribune, a suffragist, a suffragette, or a suffragette? When Kansas Territory was organized in 1854, women's suffrage quickly became a prominent issue. National leaders viewed the newly organized Western territories and states as the ideal battleground for women's rights in the United States. As Kansas entered the Union on January 29, 1861, under the Wyandotte Constitution, Kansas women achieved an early victory in gaining the right to vote in school district elections. As we look at the events that transpired right here in Riley County, we find stories that also involve notable women in the suffrage movement on a national level. One significant connection between Riley County and the national suffrage movement involved visits to Manhattan by national women's suffrage leaders Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Lucy Stone. According to George Wells, a longtime Riley Countyan whose recollections were published in the Topeka Daily Capital in 1928, Susan B. Anthony and Lucy Stone traveled to Manhattan together in 1857 to campaign for women's suffrage. Wells recalled that the two suffragists had been refused admittance to the Manhattan House Hotel as the proprietor declared that no immoral woman would stop under his roof. And in the photograph here, you can see a view looking west there on Poyntz Avenue around 1867. And on the left side there, you do see the Manhattan House Hotel. According to this hotel proprietor, the fact that these women were, quote, traipsing about the country and demanding votes for the women folk was, in his estimation, evidence of immorality. In 1867, Susan B. Anthony made her way to Kansas once again, along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, as they traveled the state together campaigning for the ballot. On Saturday, September 14, 1867, Susan B. Anthony addressed a small audience in Goves Hall on the female suffrage proposition. In attendance were 45 men, 12 women, and a few boys. Of the men present, at least 16 were opposed to the proposition. In her speech, Anthony stated that any man who voted against female suffrage was, quote, a blockhead, though she later modified her remarks to exclude farmers. And again, that same view. So this is around 1867 view of downtown Manhattan. So this is likely what Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady, the scene that they saw upon arriving here in Manhattan. Later that evening, Elizabeth Cady Stanton addressed a full house at the Congregational Church. The Kansas Radical paper reported that her address was interesting and eloquently delivered. The speech was verbatim from the one that she had presented in Lawrence, Kansas, which was just before her arrival here in Riley County. And this speech can be read online through the Library of Congress. Her primary remark was that the women wanted the ballot to secure higher wages than at the present, since women only received half of what men received for the same labor. And the original portion of the Congregational Church where Elizabeth Cady Stanton spoke is, you can see in the photograph here, it is still in use today and is referred to as Pioneer Hall. In the photograph, you can see it's on the far right, and this is a view from Juliet. Later in 1867, female and African-American suffrage were put on the ballot in 2 separate referenda. This made Kansas the first state in the Union to consider women's suffrage. In the November 5th, 1867, Riley County voted in favor of suffrage for African Americans, one of only 4 counties in Kansas to vote favorably, but voted against women's suffrage. Statewide, both amendments were defeated. African American men would earn the right to vote in all elections under the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in 1870, but Kansas women would have to wait another 42 years to gain the right to vote. During Susan B. Anthony's time in Manhattan, she became acquainted with the Pillsbury family. This is most likely a result of her finding a place to stay the night with the Pillsbury family when she was denied a stay in the Manhattan House Hotel. In particular, it would appear that Anthony became close friends with Annie Pillsbury, who was Manhattan's first female postmaster. And in the photograph, you can see that is Annie Pillsbury there on the left, her sister Nell, and her other sister Mate around the 1880s. In 1881, Susan B. Anthony wrote to Annie. In the letter, with the greeting of, quote, "my dear friend," Anthony refers to a book entitled A History of Woman Suffrage that is to be sent to Kansas State Agricultural College. So here you can see the envelope for that letter written in Anthony's handwriting, Miss Annie Pillsbury to Manhattan, Kansas, and the return address, the National Women's Suffrage Association. And here you can see that it is a 4-page letter, and what you can see here are 2 of those pages and Susan B. Anthony's signature on that bottom right page in her letter to Annie Pillsbury. Through looking at the K-State online library database, it would appear that the book secured by Annie through Susan B. Anthony is still within their holdings today. And you can see this was reported in the Industrialist newspaper in September of 1881. The college library is under renewed obligations to our esteemed postmistress, Miss Annie Pillsbury, for Volume 1 of the History of Women's Suffrage, the joint product of the pens of Miss Susan B. Anthony and Miss E.C. Stanton. And that interior view of that book, and you can also see Matilda Jocelyn Gage was also an essential component in composing this book. So now we jump ahead to 1887, when municipal suffrage was won here in Kansas, allowing women to run for office and to vote in all city elections. And in the slide here, it is a view of Leonardville, Kansas, and it in the newspaper article talks about, so the ladies of Leonardville, get ready for business. About the first opportunity you will have to exercise your newly acquired franchise will be next April at the city election. The time is drawing near and you must read up, post up, hold caucuses, nominate a ticket for mayor, councilman, etc., talk up city matters, lay plans to boom the town, etc., etc. On April 4th, 1887, Kansas's own Susanna Medora Kinsey Salter was elected mayor in Argonia, Kansas, becoming the very first female mayor in the nation. She also has a strong connection right here in Riley County. Susanna Medora Kinsey Salter was born March 2nd, 1860 in Ohio, and later moved to a Kansas farm near Silver Lake with her parents in 1872. She then attended Kansas State Agricultural College in Manhattan, starting in 1867, where she met Lewis Salter, who became her husband in 1880. While studying at Kansas State Agricultural College, Susanna's father, Oliver Kinsey, constructed a home for her and her friend in 1878. And I love this. It documents, you can see Ayers and Kinsey of Silver Lake, whose daughters are attending college, have done a very sensible thing lately. So it goes on to mention, as Mr. Kinsey is a lumber dealer and Mr. Ayers a carpenter, they can put up a home without a very great deal of expense. Parents who intend sending their boys and girls here for any length of time can better afford to build a small house than to rent. After the Mrs. Kinsey and Ayers are through with their little mansion, it will rent readily or will sell for very nearly what it cost. And my favorite part of the article, we trust this example may be imitated by others. And that was in the Industrials there in 1878. So fortunately, we were able to determine that the Kinsey home was located at 1126 Kearny Street here in Manhattan. And in the Google view of the map here, you can see where it is marked 1126 Kearny, and you can see how close proximity it is to the college campus. So you can imagine that view. And we unfortunately do not have a photograph of that home within our collections, but we were very grateful to find one through the K-State University Archives and Special Collection of the house that was built for Susanna Kinsey by her father during her time in college. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, that home is not there today. It was demolished, but it's wonderful to have a photograph to have an understanding of what that home looked like. And you can see this view. So this is around 1885, looking toward Anderson Hall here in Manhattan. So Susanna Kinsey's house would have been just a little outside of this shot to the right in the photograph. But I love getting a sense that this was the view that Susanna Kinsey would have seen around her time when she was at college. Salter was actively involved in the Alpha Beta Literary Society during her time at Kansas State Agricultural College, and ironically, during a debate on women's suffrage, argued against it. You can see here in the 1877 paper. Select reading by Miss Males. Women's suffrage will be discussed next week by Mrs. Parker and Co. on the affirmative and Mrs. Kinsey and Wilson on the negative. I'm sure at that time, little did she know that she would end up becoming first female mayor in the country. So after college, she moved to Argonia, Kansas with her husband and became involved in the local Women's Christian Temperance Union and Prohibition Party organizations. It was there she became acquainted with nationally known temperance activist Carrie Nation. So in an attempt to embarrass the members of the WTCU, a group of men drew up a slate of candidates identical with that of the WTCU, except for the office of mayor, which they submitted Susanna's name. The act itself was done as a surprise because candidates did not have to file until the day before Election Day. This faction simply had the ballots printed with Dora's name on them, and of course, without her knowledge or consent. So the chairman of the Republican Party in Argonia immediately sent a delegation to see her and found her doing the family washing. They explained to Dora what had happened and asked if she would accept the office if elected. Upon her agreement, the delegation responded with, quote, "All right, we will elect you and just show those fellows who framed this up a deal or two," end quote. Dora went with her parents that afternoon to vote, but in proper fashion did not vote for herself, leaving the ballot for mayor unmarked. The women of the WTCU voted in favor of Dora in lieu of their initial candidate, resulting in her receiving 2/3 majority of the votes, thus making Susanna Medora Kinsey Salter, at just 27 years old with 4 children at home, the very first female mayor in the nation, and she was paid $1 to do so. And here you can see the letter informing Susanna Salter of her victory in that election. In Riley County, women who were interested in registering to vote were presented with helpful commentary in local newspapers, such as the one here in the Manhattan Nationalist on March 11th, 1887. To be entitled to vote in cities of the first and second class, not in third class cities, women must appear before the city clerk sometime between the first Monday in January and the 10th day before election, give their name, age, which they had to be 21 years old at least, residence and occupation, receiving a certificate of registration which must be ready for presentation at the polls. To avoid possible annoyance, and this is my favorite part in the article, to avoid possible annoyance, we suggest that ladies go to the clerk's office with their friends. So also, as a result of women gaining the right to vote in municipal elections locally in 1887, new ballot boxes are being prepared for the women voters. They cannot vote on justices of the peace or constables, hence their ballots must be deposited in separate boxes. The next legislature will have to extend women's suffrage. Women were also not able to vote on bond issues, though they had municipal suffrage in 1887, as evidenced here in this newspaper article. We hear that many people have the impression that the municipal suffrage law gives women the right to vote on the waterworks proposition. They are mistaken. Women may vote on all school matters and for municipal officers, but for nothing else. And the photograph that you see, that was the water reservoir that is still up on the hill at Bluemont Hill today, of course, has been covered over, but that the women of Manhattan were not eligible to vote for that. In looking at the results for the Riley County municipal election in 1887, we find the following. So here you can see the Manhattan, Leonardville, and Randolph, the total population, the total votes cast, how many of those were men and how many were women. So as we look at that, Manhattan had about a 52% voter turnout, of which 23% of those were women. Leonardville had 30% voter turnout, of about 35% of those were women, and Randolph had a 20% voter turnout, of which 26% of those were women. So you can see it's taking a little bit to get some traction in our communities here. So we jump ahead in time now to 1894, when the Equal Suffrage Amendment had been voted down yet again. In leading up to the election in 1894, however, local women organized suffrage clubs and met numerous times throughout the month. So you can see in the paper here, the Manhattan Suffrage Amendment Club will meet in regular session at the courtroom promptly at 8 o'clock. Please wear the yellow badge. And that was Mrs. Flora M. Allen, the secretary. Thankfully, we do have a photograph of Miss Florence Ingraham Allen. Her home is still standing today at 1724 Fairchild here in Manhattan. And unfortunately, within our collection, we do not have one of those suffrage ribbons. But what you can see in the slide here is an example of what she might be referring to as wearing the yellow badge as they attend these suffrage meetings. And I also wanted to mention for the courtroom, it wouldn't be the courthouse that we have today, which was built in 1906. At this time, the courtroom would have been located on the southeast corner of present-day 4th and Points. So they also had a women's suffrage mass meeting at the Grange building at 431 Points Avenue. So you can see that building there, and obviously there were meeting rooms up above there, but full program. So the following is the program of the Women's Suffrage Convention to be held at the Grange Hall in Manhattan, Kansas. This will probably be the only suffrage meeting held in Riley County before the election, which they did have some after that. But you can see the full program with the music. The address of welcome was by Honorable Judge Spillman, and notable speakers such as Mrs. Carrie Chapman Catt and Mrs. Annie L. Diggs. And somebody traveled all the way from Wyoming to speak on the issue. They also had meetings inside the homes of members. So tomorrow evening, the Suffrage Association will celebrate the birthday anniversary of Lucy Stone Blackwell at the home of Miss L.R. Elliott on Humboldt Street. So here you can see the home there at 601 Humboldt, which is unfortunately no longer standing, but a photograph on the far left, the woman there is Mrs. L.R. Elliott, and her name was Emmeline. They also had a street suffrage meeting. So this was in September of 1912. A suffrage street meeting was held at the southwest corner of 4th and Points Avenue in Manhattan. The featured speaker included Laura Clay, who was co-founder of the Kentucky Equal Rights Association. And you can see there what was the Union National Bank. That building is still standing today. And in the article, you can read, the car was stopped on the Union National Bank corner and Miss Clay was introduced. She has a very rich voice and speaks easily in the open air. She mentioned the growth of the number of women in industrial pursuits, there being some 7 million of them now wage earners. So unfortunately, we do not have a photograph of this event either. So if they exist, we would absolutely love to see them, because you can imagine this might be quite a spectacle in the middle of downtown there at the time in 1912. So to give some perspective, by 1911, Manhattan had a growing population of over 7,000 residents with nearly 3,000 enrolled at Kansas State Agricultural College. So here is Poyntz Avenue looking west from present-day 3rd Street. So you might recognize, if you're from around the area, some of those buildings in the photograph there. But to give you an idea of what it looked like locally around the time the suffrage activity is taking place. So in June 1911, the first local equal suffrage association in Kansas, which this was the first one formed since the amendment was submitted, was organized by the College Hill Women in Manhattan Township. And you can see this organization starts off with 50 members, a remarkable showing in a country precinct with a total of less than 100 women who could vote. Almost full page advertisements in the paper encouraging women to get involved. To the women of Manhattan, 907 of you are registered and 907 should vote next Tuesday. And then of course it goes into detail explaining just why. And this was April 1911. To raise money for suffrage campaigns, local women held suffrage teas, ice cream socials, and a variety of other gatherings to help raise awareness and funds for the cause. Another creative means to gather support was the sale of suffrage balloons. These balloons were approximately 2 feet in circumference and typically a bright yellow-orange color lettered with votes for women. June 29th, 1912 was established as Balloon Day in Kansas, and you can see that reflected in the paper from 1912. This was in the Riley County Democrat. Balloon Day for suffrage. June 29th will be Balloon Day in Kansas. That date has been set by the Kansas State Equal Suffrage Association for the selling of toy balloons, the profits to be used to carry on the campaign, which is now being waged in Kansas for votes for women. So some of these women are getting very creative on how to encourage other women to get involved. I also came across an article where they were putting, you would take in your laundry and they would put slips of paper within your laundry when you got it back and it took back to the home, and you would have advertisements encouraging women to vote within your newly cleaned laundry. You can also see that they also encouraged children to get involved. The Riley County Equal Suffrage Association offers cash prizes for the 3 best essays on why women should vote to the pupils of the schools. Every district is to have a local contest to decide who is to represent the school, as each district should enter only 1 contestant for the county prizes. The winners in the county can enter the state contest, in which cash prizes of $25 are offered. And that was in the Leonardville Monitor. As I mentioned, they also held ice cream socials. And this is, again, within the homes of different men and women who were involved in the movement. Oftentimes, of course, the husband was very supportive in what we have found in research, and were almost as actively involved as the women in being proponents for women's suffrage. So the Equal Suffrage Association will hold an ice cream social on the lawn of W.A. Limbacher, corner Osage Street and Juliet Avenue. Everybody is invited. Various female social clubs also use their meetings to organize for suffrage. Here you can see we do have a photograph of the Riverside Club here around 1912. So in this, it mentions Miss Julia Kiefer was hostess of the Riverside Club December 14th, 12 members being present. After a short business meeting, the following program was given. So they had songs, And then it goes on to mention a speaker was present and gave a talk on women's suffrage and wanted the ladies of Blue Bottom, both members and non-members of the club, to organize a suffrage club to work for women's rights. So although these meetings were common and taking place all over Riley County, of course, the weather did not always cooperate. And I think this is just a lot of fun with the photograph. You can see the piles of snow. This is looking west around the 300 North Block of Points Avenue in 1912. So the Suffrage Club was to have held a meeting at Charles Curry's on March 14th, has been postponed until the weather is settled. And as I mentioned, fortunately, we do have a photograph of what it looked like. You can see how that snow would be a deterrent to hold some of those meetings. And we'll refer back to that photo too. There's a woman that we'll speak about coming up here who also had to face some of those difficulties. And that was Hannah Wetzig-Droll. So, and I also want to mention, although there's not time allowed to mention every woman in Riley County involved in the suffrage movement, just wanted to select and highlight just a couple women here. So Hannah was born to Heinrich and Mary Vogelsong Wetzig in Winkler, Kansas, which is just north of Randolph, in 1875. She later attended Kansas State Agricultural College in 1891 and taught for a period of time at Winkler District number 25, which you can see in the photograph here. This is the same school that she had graduated from in 1890. She was also elected as assistant principal of city schools and treasurer and vice president of the County Teachers Library Association. In 1905, Hannah was elected Riley County Superintendent of Public Instruction, becoming the very first elected Riley County female official, a role she served in from 1905 to 1915. And fortunately, we do have within the collection some very generous donations by community members. Here you can see the annual reports of Hannah Wetzig, Superintendent of Riley County, Kansas. So these are the reports that she would have to compile in regards to the schools here. So her involvement with the suffrage movement in Riley County peaked in 1912. In a March 1912 newspaper article entitled "A Dutiful Officer," Miss Hannah Wetzig, who has, and this is a quote in the paper, Miss Hannah Wetzig, who has been visiting the schools in rural districts of the county, said that a snowstorm caused a 25-foot drift. As, quote, one of the county's most efficient officers, she did not let the awful conditions of the road stand in the way of her duties. So again, if you remember that photograph of the snow on Points Avenue, Hannah had to ride around on horseback to go to these different school districts all the way in northern Riley County. And here she's talking about the 25-foot snow drifts, which did not keep her from doing her duties. So in 1915, she married Dr. Henry Droll of Mayday. And you can see in the article here, a lady candidate. So there was a point where she had thought about running for higher office. So this was February 1916. We understand that Mrs. Hannah Wetzig-Droll of our city may later decide to be a candidate for senator from this district at the Republican primaries, and goes on to mention her vast credentials. Hannah passed away in 1970 at 94 years of age and is buried in the Alta Vista Cemetery in Wabunsee County. So our next woman that we'd like to highlight today is Maddie Toothacre Kimball. Maddie Toothacre Kimball was born to William Henry and Lydia Elizabeth Toothacre in Johnson County, Kansas in 1871. Maddie's debut into the political world was made when she was only 10 years old while accompanying her father, William, as he campaigned for Charles Robinson's second bid for Kansas governorship. Maddie participated in the campaign by presenting a little rhyming speech at every political rally for the governor hopeful. Even from this young age, Maddie had a gift for oration. So Maddie entered Kansas State Agricultural College in 1888 and was an active member of the Alpha Beta Literary Society. Unfortunately, due to ongoing illness, she was forced to resign from college and return to her family home in Kansas City, where she taught school. In 1902, she married Charles Augustus Kimball and moved back to Manhattan, Kansas in 1905. It was here that Maddie became involved in a number of women's social clubs, including the Ladies Library Association and the Domestic Science Club, in addition to her involvement in the push for women's suffrage. And one thing that is also really fun to see is her friendship with Hannah Wetzig-Droll. So the two women worked very closely together, and there are instances where they're going up to out to Ogden and up to Randolph to help these other women form suffrage clubs. So Maddie traveled extensively throughout the state promoting suffrage and speaking on women's issues. So here you can see there will be a women's suffrage speech on the streets of Leonardville next Saturday afternoon, and a list of those present. They will speak from automobiles. Come out and hear them, as you will hear some of the best women talent in the state. And you can see Maddie Toothaker Kimball is one of those women referred to there. In 1920, after the 19th Amendment was ratified, Maddie was chosen as Kansas's first female presidential elector as a Republican. In the paper here, this is obviously before the confirmation of it, Aggie may be elector. KSAC woman would cast Republican vote. Mrs. Maddie Toothaker Kimball, a junior in 1892, is only Kansas woman ever to be recognized thus by a leading party. So in addition to Maddie's service as the first Kansas female presidential elector, I wanted to mention just a few of her other credentials on her resume. So she was 5th District President of the Kansas Equal Suffrage Association starting in 1911. She was founder and first president of the Kansas Council of Women. She was president of the Kansas Women's Press Association. One thing that's really neat to know, she was also primarily responsible for having the cottonwood tree recognized as Kansas's state tree, and that was in 1912. She was the 5th District President of the Federation of Women's Clubs. She was auditor and state president of the Kansas League of Women Voters, president of the Women's Day Club, and district president of the Kansas Authors Club. So you can see she was heavily involved in a variety of different activities in the community. And I did want to share this quote from Maddie Toothaker Kimball. In response, and her quote here is in response, there were some people that felt as a mother, she should not be out traveling and working for women's suffrage, that it was taking away from her responsibilities at home. And I think this speaks to the contrary to that. She says, "To be active in politics, I consider a part of my duty as a mother. Politics is closely related to the home and the family, so close in fact that I consider it the duty of every mother to take part in the politics of her state." So Maddie Toothaker Kimball passed away in 1942 and is buried in Sunset Cemetery here in Manhattan, Kansas. So jumping back now into that 1912 suffrage campaign, found many notable women traveling throughout the state. And in the slide here, you can see, again, this is referencing that women's suffrage meeting in Leonardville. They will be here in automobiles. So unfortunately, we do not have a photograph of that event, but you can see the women in the automobile here. Many of the women in this photograph are ones that traveled through Riley County at the time. And that included Governor Walter Roscoe Stubbs' wife, Stella Stubbs, who was one of those leaders in getting this organized, the traveling tour promoting suffrage in the county and throughout the state. You can also see in the photograph here, this is the delegates to the Kansas Equal Suffrage Association in Topeka, Kansas around 1912. The group voted to affiliate with National Association as support for women's suffrage amendment to the US Constitution. And the reason why this is important, it is very likely that Maddie Toothaker Kimball is in this photograph. Other prominent speakers in Manhattan included Dr. Anna Howard Shaw, who spoke at the Marshall Theater. So in October of 1912, Reverend Anna Howard Shaw, president of the National Equal Suffrage Association, spoke to over 1,000 citizens at the Marshall Theater. And that building is still standing today at the corner of 4th and Houston Street. So as stated in the Manhattan Mercury, quote, "For over 2 hours, Dr. Shaw held the attention of this audience. No one left the hall, and the interest manifested by every listener was apparent to all. While the meeting was a women's suffrage meeting, nearly 1/2 of the audience were men, and much of the applause when the speaker made a good point came from the men," end quote. The following day, Dr. Shaw spoke to students at Kansas State Agricultural College during their assembly hour. Suffrage sentiment found its way into nearly every facet of life during 1912 in Riley County. This included clothing. So in the photograph here, one of those stores where you saw some signs of suffrage, the Spot Cash store occupying the entire northeast corner at Points and 4th Street, which is known as the Eames Block, built in 1890, offered the latest fashions at an affordable cost. In 1911, the Spot Cash advertised the new trouserette skirts for sale. These are the much talked about skirts, as it mentions in the advertisement, sometimes called tourist or suffragette skirts. These are made with full trousers, allowing perfect freedom in walking. And on the left side there, you see Constance Wilde. So Constance Lloyd Wilde, she was suffragist and campaigner for rational dress reform. And she was also married to notable poet and playwright Oscar Wilde. So you can see she appears in this photograph modeling this new style in New York. So those styles that were in New York, you can see they make their way to the Little Apple here in Manhattan. Sometimes a newspaper, they like to make light of these things. It is too bad that the suspender company that failed the other day could not have held up a little longer. Suffragettes advocate wearing them. And that was in 1913. So it also found its way into entertainment. Again, here is the Marshall Theater. In September of 1912, the Marshall Theater gave a showing of a popular motion film, The Suffragette Sheriff. In this film, Rattlesnake Bill and his industrious wife, she's known only as Bill's wife, the sheriff, enjoyed the simple life until the arrival of Bill's old maid sister. The latter was an ardent suffragist and so convincingly shared her doctrines that the good wife of Bill became dissatisfied with her lot and then left the kitchen to enlighten those that, quote, dwelled in the darkness. In switching roles, Bill takes on the housework while his wife is elected sheriff. So as you can see, this is a still of that motion picture that was shown at the Marshall Theater in 1912. Suffrage even found its way into Manhattan menus. So here you can see a menu from the Gillette Hotel, and the photograph is of the Gillette Hotel around 1912, a bull moose menu. Howard Allman served dinner a la progressive. And if you go to the bottom there, Jane Addams pudding with a side of suffragette sauce. So even within food, you can see where suffrage is coming into play. Suffrage activity also took stage on the K-State campus. In the Royal Purple Yearbook from 1913, illustrations and photographs exemplify significant state events of 1912. In the photograph here, you can see Kansas State agricultural students in an automobile parade in 1912. What's interesting, all of these women are women in the automobiles, all wearing their white dresses. And those white dresses in local newspapers here in Riley County, they are advertising that if local women wanted to go to some of the larger cities to work for women's suffrage and to march in the parades, it recommends a wardrobe that they wear, and that was the white dresses. So they would all look uniform then. But then you can see in the paper there, the Student Herald, cast your vote now. Who is your choice for the next president? So they had ballot boxes placed in various areas such as Anderson Hall, the Domestic Science Hall, the auditorium, and then topics on suffrage. Purple in 1913. This is Boer pushing women's suffrage. So here you have these two women in a wheelbarrow being pushed by this man. So in January 1915, a suffragette ticket was elected by the K-State sophomore class. And this is from the Royal Purple 1913, but it was at 1915 that they had a full suffragette ticket there and was elected by the sophomore class. So it's also important to note that not all were interested in promoting women's suffrage. So some of the articles found in local papers here, for example, the Riley County Democrat, this was January 1912. There are two kinds of suffragettes, the unhappily married and the unhappily married. Another one from the Leonardville Monitor from April 1897, it talks about songbirds and suffrage. Last year, 500,000 songbirds were destroyed in this country that women might wear them on their hats. On Cape Cod, 40,000 tern were killed for this purpose. and it goes on to list other birds. This leads the Brooklyn, so New York, eagle to ask, can so cruel a creature as woman ask for the right to vote? And then lastly, this is in the Leonardville Monitor, kind of a strange article. The Kansas judge who has delivered the opinion that a man has the right to bury his wife alive apparently has no fear that he will ever be in a position to need the equal suffrage vote. So you can see going through just the local papers has given us just a wealth of information on the things that were happening within Raleigh County in regards to suffrage, both for and against. Another one here, if it is to become the fixed custom for the women to burn their hats when they gain the suffrage, a question arises which may affect masculine votes. Of course, the burning of hats involves the purchase of new hats. Will the tyrant man be allowed to continue his time-honored custom of drawing checks to pay for the new hat, or will the newly enfranchised citizens scorn that dependence and furnish the new millinery themselves? And that was found in the Leonardville Monitor in 1913. This was one that was interesting. Many might be familiar locally with the name Eleanor Strong. The Strong House is still standing today, but this was an editorial that she wrote to the Manhattan Republic. Still another something new. A few days ago, a couple of women were seen driving toward town over the Blue Bottom Road. When just east of Henry Strong's, one of the women got out of the buggy and violently confiscated a valuable Scotch collie dog. This report is to warn against dog thieves and also give a pointer as to the progress women's rights is making among us. We trust that the ladies, and the fact that ladies is in quotes there, kind of lets you know what Eleanor thinks of this. Will be kind to Doggy and let us know where we might call and see him. Mrs. E.H. Strong. So alas, on November 5th, 1912, Kansas women had full voting rights, and Kansas became the 8th state to accomplish this. When the votes had been counted, the final tally was over 175,000 for the amendment and just over 159,000 against. As you can see in the Raleigh County Democrat here, suffragists are happy. Mrs. W.A. Johnston, president of the Kansas Equal Suffrage Association, estimates that the women's suffrage amendment carried in Kansas by from 10,000 to 15,000 majority. This estimate is based upon reports to Miss Johnston from 34 counties. So as we are led up to the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, the Manhattan Tribune had this to say: the Susan B. Anthony Amendment is scheduled to pass through the final stage this week, but the suffragette at our house says that suffrage is now so common that there are no more thrills to it. I also want to mention, however, so here in Kansas, even though women received the right to vote in 1912, they continued to fight for women's rights outside of Kansas as well, for those states that did not have suffrage yet. So women such as Maddie Toothaker Kimball would continue to be involved after that battle was won here in Kansas, and traveling to some of those other states to help that women's suffrage cause. So in conclusion, as we look back on the last 100 years and beyond at the fight for women's suffrage, it's important to reflect on the individuals that helped shape the outcome right here in our home in Raleigh County and continue to honor their legacy. So as we approach this 2020 election year, let's remember to not take our right to vote for granted. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you are interested in learning more about Raleigh County history, please feel free to visit our website at www.rileycountyks.gov/museum. We also have a Facebook page where we have been periodically posting on some of these women who were involved in the suffrage movement locally. I also like to invite anybody who has any stories that relate to family members, any relatives that were involved in the suffrage movement here in Raleigh County. We would love to hear additional stories that relate to that. So thank you very much.